In October of 2018, Dr. Mussio co-founded the Long Run Initiative. The initiative is a forum for academic experts, business leaders, and public policymakers. It provides insights from the analysis of long-run experiences and trends to provide context and deepen understanding of the grand challenges facing businesses and government. In short, Dr. Mussio and his colleagues at the Long Run Initiative focus on where we have been, where we are now, and where we are going. And this makes him the perfect host for this afternoon's conversation on corporate leadership in an era of transformation. Dr. Mussio will take about 10 minutes to set a context, to frame the trends and challenges of corporate leadership today, followed by a conversation with Darrell White and Mona Malone. And hence, it is with great pleasure and gratitude that I now turn things over to Laurence Mussio. Laurence, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Shates, and welcome to everybody to the Corporate Leadership in an Era of Transformation. I'd like to begin my remarks today by sharing a personal story. It was late in the evening on a mild mid-February night. The streets were surprisingly crowded. For so late an hour as my wife and I walked back from a party we won't soon forget. There's a picture of the party right there. In a city that is almost our second home. Of course, we had masks on and everybody did, but the February in question was in 2020. The city, Venice, the most serene republic on the Adriatic. The occasion was the famous Carnevale. The masks people wore were elaborate works of art, not the PPE kind. By the time we left the city the next day, news had broke that the rest of the Carnevale had been canceled. A deadly virus, you see, had been working its way from Wuhan, China, to claim more and more victims and dominate hourly newscasts. And as we know, there was no vaccine and no cure. It turns out we were in an early hotspot of the outbreak in Italy. That we were in a city that had invented the term quarantine, quarantena, was not lost on us. We miraculously escaped unharmed. And so, in days, it went from this and this to this and this. In the weeks following, much of the world began to shut down. It's now a year and a half that we're living with, and too many dying from, COVID-19. I share that story because it is a kind of a micro illustration of how one era ends and another begins. One day you're reveling at a costume ball, and the next you're converting your laundry room to a long-term home office, stockpiling Cottonelle for some reason, sanitizer and masks, and having a much more intimate relationship with Amazon Prime that you ever thought possible. For leaders and systems, the onset of crisis caused the masks of competence and invincibility to slip, sometimes very badly. It also brought forth many examples of courage and strength, and we got to watch it all from lockdown. In all, the chain reaction between the pandemic, the host societies that affected, and their, let's call them, underlying conditions, is the catalyst to this new era of transformation. That's the subject of our session today. So first, let's define the transformation and then look at the challenges for corporate leaders. Rhetorically, this transformation is defined by some catchphrases, as Gerard mentioned. Building back better seems to be popular. Reckoning seems to be gaining ground, but then so does the Roaring Twenties. In terms of substance, it's about health security, climate change, growing income inequality, racial inequality, indigenous relations, artificial intelligence, big tech, and on it goes. So the coming era looks a lot like the previous era, only, shall we say, on steroids. And right now, everything seems to be on steroids. The intensity of our debates and divisions, the stock market, economic growth, you name it. But the classic challenges that underpin the wealth of nations have not gone away. And we'll have to re-engage our attention, the productivity puzzle, innovation, inflation. Okay, that's the transformation in a nutshell. What about leadership? Everybody on this call who's lived through the last 18 months knows that the pandemic involved a fundamental test of leadership in crisis. Both public and corporate leaders were forced to confront the asymmetries of decision-making under conditions of uncertainty. A lot of it was painful to watch. Terrifyingly unprepared officials, many of them frequently wrong, but never in doubt. Many rose to the occasion, though. The economy shook, rattled, and rolled, but public policy acted relatively swiftly to protect us from the worst by firing essentially a money cannon in all directions. Incredibly, though, the North Atlantic world, if not Canada, developed and produced several effective vaccines in record time. All this shows that governments matter and that cooperation between the public and private sectors can be a formula for success if working collaboratively for the common good. In the United States, the economic recovery is so strong that one economist in the Wall Street Journal this morning suggested that it was without historical parallel, which suggests to me two things. One, a booming economy, and two, a pretty light understanding of the past. Our current state very much suggests that maybe what we've seen up to now is only the halftime score. And as my childhood idol, Harlem Globetrotter Meadowlark Lemon once said, life's most meaningless statistic is the halftime score. So we'll have to wait before passing definitive judgment, in other words. The pandemic was a short-term leadership test. Dealing with sustained change is a long-term one. For corporate leaders, I'm going to suggest we think about three grand challenges. Number one, the evolution of the corporation's public role and function. Number two, managing both risk and uncertainty effectively. And number three, building institutions that are at the least resilient and at best anti-fragile. Okay, one, corporate leadership's greatest external challenge to me is negotiating the evolution of its own public role. One recent Edelman poll suggested that 2/3 of Canadians believe that CEOs should step in when the government cannot fix societal problems. Okay, that's a potentially very big challenge, and it is new and unfamiliar territory for executives. Crossing that terrain requires a decision engine that generates a longer run view and a deeper context, not to mention the duty to balance interests. It also requires a careful respect for the traditions of responsible government and democratic accountability. Handing a massive amount of power to top managers seems out of step with the times, it would seem to me. Defining the outlines and the limits of this new role should be job number one, and it cannot be defined by default. For a while now, some corporations have been moving toward a major redefinition of the public corporation itself, reconsidering shareholder primacy and embracing stakeholder capitalism. And one way this idea is captured is the move toward using purpose as an organizing principle within the corporation. If the purpose movement is going to mean anything beyond a marketing slogan, this redefinition will require new structures, new measures of success, and especially a new mindset. Second, what are corporate leaders good at? Or what do we expect them to be good at? I mean, beyond profit making. In the long run, one big answer is managing risk and uncertainty. Success involves the willingness to take risks and to bet on the future. Proper risk taking is the basis of our productivity and progress. Corporate leaders need to foster, stimulate, and encourage that entrepreneurial spirit. The third and final point, corporate leaders are being challenged to help build institutions that are resilient and anti-fragile.